Okay, folks, I think we're ready to begin. Welcome to ResearchWare's webinar on sort of intermediary features of HyperRESEARCH. I have a lot to cover today, but at any time that you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat window. If I'm going too fast or something didn't make sense, please feel free to speak up or chat up, as the case may be, and let me know. I just want to do a very quick refresher on sort of the structure behind HyperRESEARCH and things that either from your experience in using the product or working with our free trial version that we have available, or having attended our HyperRESEARCH Basics webinar that you're familiar with. In HyperRESEARCH, you basically have a study file. The study file consists of one or more cases. Cases are like index cards. They record information about a code name, the source document it came from, and a pointer basically into the chunk of text or the image or the video or audio source that you applied the code to. In the case of text, it's simply a character reference. This here says that this code 2 was applied to a document called interview 1, and it covers characters 211 to 298 in that document. You don't have to organize your research structure around cases. You could have everything in one case called uncategorized or untitled. You can organize your research where you have a series of subjects that you've interviewed, people you've interviewed. Each case can be a subject. You have other ways that you can group it. All that was sort of covered in the basics. We provide a flexible architecture so that you can conduct your research the way that is most intuitive to you and the way you prefer, and you don't have to learn a forced methodology of a particular piece of research software and conform to that to conduct your research. So flexibility is a key point behind HyperRESEARCH. In previous things, we went through basic coding. You just select text in a source, apply a code to it, and you've created one of those codes on those index cards. Okay? With that brief introduction to a background, I'm going to move on to HyperRESEARCH and start today's topics. So just give me a moment to bring that up and switch things around here. So today, in sort of intermediate features, I'm actually going to give you a brief introduction to just about every feature that HyperRESEARCH has, and how you would use them in a very simplified model, and I'm making it very simplified for the sake of compacting all this into the 45 to 50 minutes that we have here in sort of a research cycle. So topics that I'm going to touch on, as I'm going to show you, are sort of unique theory builder that we have, that HyperRESEARCH is the only application out there I'm aware of with something like this. Our code map tool for network mapping and showing relationships between codes. Our source text searching capabilities to search through your sources for keywords and themes. Our auto-coding capability to turn keywords that you're looking for or themes that you're looking for into coded material for review. And the series of basic features within the application to manipulate codes, to consolidate them, rename them, remove them if they're no longer applicable, and things like that. And I'm going to try and put that in a sort of context of an approach to a particular research study that you can use these tools in. In your particular approach to research, you may not use them in this particular order. You may, use some of the tools and not others. This is just one way. So please don't think that this particular approach I'm going to show you today is the only methodology that you can utilize within the HyperRESEARCH product. That said, I'm going to go and open up our Cinderella study. This is a sample study. It was done for a class in sociology way back in the early 1990s. I'll just give you a little bit of the premise behind this sociological study. It was basically a class on feminist studies conducted by one of ResearchWare's co-founders, Dr. Charlene Heiss-Biber, who's a professor of sociology and women's studies at Boston College. And it was a simple exercise. In her class, she asked a number of her students, which were approximately 20-something years old, what they envisioned their life would be like 20 years in the future when they were 40 years old. And so this research study is basically, the source materials are short interviews, short documents where each of these women authored what they thought their life would be like 20 years in the future when they were 40 years old, reflecting at this in a sociology class when they were in their 20s. Then the premise behind the study, or the research question is that Charlene asked is, do these 20-year-olds have a realistic perspective on what their life will be like when they're 40 or not? Or that may be a poor way to say it. You know, are their expectations extremely high? Do they believe that when they're, you know, at age 20, that when they reach age 40 in 20 years, they will effectively have it all? They'll have the perfect family life, they'll have the perfect career life, and they will be happy and successful, and hence it was sort of the, you know, the wish come true, and therefore that's why it got the name Cinderella study. So as you can see here, if I just quickly go through the material, I've basically got 8 cases here. Each case, there's a series of codes on it. If I look at some of these source materials, there's these are relatively brief interviews where the person talks about, you know, how they see themselves 20 years from when this interview was conducted in the future at age 40. So to illustrate or to ask that research question, which is there, you know, aspirations when they look 20 years into the future, age 40, a very high expectation or not, I'm going to introduce you to our theory builder, okay? And I'll show you a sample theory first, and then I'll show you how you can build a theory. So I'm going to open an existing theory that we've set up here. And a theory is basically, and this is very simplified, you can make these very detailed and complex, but it's basically, what is your hypothesis? What is your supposition about this research? And in this case, if I walk you through it, it's sort of expressed as a series of rules related to codes. So this study has gone through, and people have sort of organically attached codes as they've read through the source material, a kind of grounded theory approach where they've gone through and they've read some passage. And if I cycle around to interview one here, and I just sort of pick one like, I'm making a high salary, and we look at the source material, you can see, you know, that they believe that 20 years from when this was written in the 1990s, that they'll be president of the Copley and Mini Advertising Agency. Well, that's probably a very high-profile job generating a high salary, right? Later in the text, it actually says that their job is making a 6-figure salary. So it was attached with this code, high salary, etc. In our sort of hypothesis that we're taking, we're saying that if we see the code present in the data, if we see the theme that they're making a high salary, and the theme that they have a fabulous non-traditional job, we're going to sort of infer something. We're going to infer that they have a high work commitment. It's, you know, it's hard to be as successful if you don't have a strong commitment to your career, right? Similarly, in our second rule, we look and we say, well, if we see this code that they get married and stays married, a long, successful marriage, and that they want kids or they have kids, we're going to infer another theme. We're going to infer that they have a high family commitment, right? Because that makes sense if you've got the sort of, traditional family life and loving husband, kids, so on and so forth. You're putting some effort into that part of your life. Then for rule 3 in this hypothesis, we're basically saying that if we see a high work commitment, this inferred code, if you will, and a high family commitment, we're going to infer that there's the potential for work-family conflict, right? That something's got to be giving. Maybe they're having problems juggling their schedules. They have no time for their kids. Who knows what it is, but it could be some challenges. There's some potential there for work-family conflict. And our last rule in this simple little 4-rule theory that we're doing says that if I see this potential for work-family conflict and I see some codes that were organically coded in the data, such as that they think they can combine work and family with no problems, or that they've got this successful, happy life in 20 years in the future when they're 40, then I've reached the conclusion. I've found some evidence, admittedly very simplified, but I've found evidence that these people have that Cinderella complex, is what we're calling it, that they believe that in 20 years all their dreams and aspirations will be fulfilled and that they will achieve the sort of perfect idealized life. Again, this is built in this little tool, our theory builder, as the sort of series of expressions based upon the presence or absence of codes to sort of infer, do I see something, right? Do I see evidence to support the hypothesis behind my data, or do I see evidence to support my research question?